Hello. Okay, up to chapter 5. Now remember, we've been to the sweet shop and Nine has started inquiring, and actually the sweet man, not that he was a sweet man, he was the sweet shop man, he got a little bit unnerved when she started asking about Flabbergast Auntie. She's got a bit of a reputation and it sounds like no one really wants to get messed up with it, so let's find out what happens in chapter 5. The towering candlemaker's shop was not hard to spot. There was a distant glow of flame atop the tall white building, coming from an alleyway between the sweet shop and a huge multi-storied building shaped like a giant, and a slightly wonky, pointy hat. Nine felt odd as she turned down the passage towards the bright glow. It wasn't that long ago that she would have run down an alleyway such as this, having pickpocketed someone at the local market. Now, here she was, strolling down one, with a troll for company and a satchel full of sweets, looking for a dish who knew how to turn things into gold. Was this what her mother had imagined life would be like for Nine when she had left her at the house at the edge of magic? Nine knew so little about her ma. Received with thanks, the safekeeper. The words danced around in Nine's mind as she walked towards the bright glow, which seemed to come from the left-hand side of the end of the alley. What had her mother given the safekeeper, and could it answer some of her questions? Nine's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by her pickpocket senses tingling. Something was wrong. Someone or something was following them. She slowed her step, sharpened her ears, but the only sound was the long toe-nailed feet of Eric and her own. Slightly faster, heartbeat. Still, as she walked further down the alleyway, the feeling grew stronger and stronger. Nine's breathing became shallower and faster. Her muscles tensed, ready for action. Something behind her. There was something behind her. Unable to bear it any longer, Nine whirled around, fists clenched. An empty alleyway. No one. Nothing. Having had experience of wandering the realms of magic, Nine had learned to no longer trust her eyes, though, but to trust her instincts. Instincts which were screaming that there definitely was something there, without question. Someone behind them, someone who had no intention of being seen. And that, Nine had to admit, was almost certainly a problem. Her heart thumping, Nine grabbed Eric's bark-like arm and speedily marched on down the alleyway towards the glow of the candlemaker's shop. Letting out a long breath, Nine reached the end of the alleyway and turned left. There stood a tall, thin, and round, windowless building made of curved, whitewashed bricks. The golden, fiery beacon at its top flickered at the slight breeze. A little sign creaked on a bracket sticking out of the wall. Wax and Wicks. Nine turned and looked at the alley one last time. "I know you're there," she said, trying to keep the fear out of her voice, "and you don't scare me." "Scares Eric." She pulled the troll towards the shop's narrow white door, yanked the door open and tried to shove Eric inside. But broad trolls and narrow doorways never going to be a great match. Nine pushed and shoved him until, with a satisfying pop, Eric landed in the shop. Nine dashed in after him and slammed the door behind her. As she did, she realised she was standing in pitch darkness. She sighed loudly. Why couldn't things ever be normal? Not like, whimpered Eric. There was the sound of long toe-nailed shuffling, and then the feeling of long toe-nailed foot squashing her own shoe. "You need to be a bit braver," Nine whispered. She gently steered Eric away from her foot, but not too far away. Coming from the daylight of beyond the blackness of the shop, Nine's eyes were struggling to see anything, and she had to admit she didn't like it at all. There was a sudden whoosh as a tiny yellow flame burst into life a little way ahead of them, and another a little way above it, and then another. Nine stared at the flames as dozens all lit up, going higher and higher as if they were sitting on the rungs of a ladder or a staircase. Nine breathed. "I suppose we go up." She moved warily through the gloom, holding tight to Eric's hand. He squeezed tightly back. As she climbed up the barely visible, creaking steps, each candle seemed to whisper, "Pick me, pick me." Candle, speak, Eric said, and even in the dark, Nine could sense his wibbly downturned mouth. Don't worry, Nine whispered. I won't touch them. As Nine reached the top of the staircase with the glow of the tiny candles behind her, she was once more standing in darkness. She tightened her grip on Eric's rough fingers. Now what? She whispered. Whoosh! There was a blaze of light as dozens of candles suddenly burst into flames. There were flames of every colour, even rainbow-coloured, revealing candles of every shape and every size. Some were squat and wide, some were elaborately carved, like fountains, solidified in wax. Some were well burned and standing in saucers on spindly-legged stools, and others were perched on tiny shelves on the walls. There were tall candles in candlestick holders, and even a couple of candle-lit chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. The flickering lights threw up threatening shadows of more candles all over the high, round walls. Nine looked at Eric. There was a chilly, unwelcome feel in the air, which was odd when surrounded by so much light and flame. Nine looked around her. No sign of anyone. A chubby red candle with golden swirls stood within reach. I suppose we just take one? She asked, her fingers twitching towards it. Suddenly, every flickering flame went out, plunged them into complete darkness once more. Nine didn't know whether to gasp or sigh, but before she could decide, there was another whoosh of air and the light as the candles all burst back into life. Nine jumped. An extremely tall witch stood on the other side of the room. She wore a black cloak and had thin black hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her eyes were narrowed, and she had the expression of someone who'd been chewing on a dead slug for a fortnight. Hello, said Nine, feeling decidedly short. We'd like to buy a candle. The tall witch stared at them with all the warmth of a frozen puddle. She tutted noisily, and the flames extinguished again. Could you stop doing that? No like, said Eric as he stepped on Nine's foot again. Whoosh! The flames lit up once more, and the shopkeeper was standing right in front of her. I dislike customers, she said, I dislike customers handling my stock, disturbing my peace. I crave the darkness. I'd never have guessed, muttered Nine. She lifted her head to look defiantly into the shopkeeper's eyes. Just take this one, hissed the tall witch, thrusting a thin white candle into Nine's hands. Take it. Now leave. Nine glanced at the candle in her hands. But we haven't paid. No charge. It's nothing but trouble anyway. Take it, the wretched thing. Go away. Now go. Nine could feel another whoosh coming on. Wait. I need to ask something. We're looking for a dish who can probably talk, and... The flames, which had begun to dim, bounced into life again. Nine leapt out of her skin, and to see the tall witch towering above her, closer than she had done before. Oh, she can talk, growled the shopkeeper. Moaned on and on about the candle I sold her last week, and had the cheek to bring it back. She bent over Nine, her dark eyes dancing with candle flames. Now leave. The candles extinguished, and there was silence in the shop. Silence except for Nine huffing loudly. Then the little candles on the stairs below began lighting up one by one, as if ushering their customers out. Goodbye, goodbye, the candles whispered as Nine and Eric stepped tentatively down each stair. Bye, bye, Eric replied. We weren't talking to you two, whispered one of the candles. The other seemed to stifle a giggle. Nine had the familiar feeling of frustration and impending doom. Candles giggling at her was probably not a great sign. She shoved the candle she'd been given into her satchel, and then reached into the darkness for Eric's hand. They stumbled their way back to the front door and stepped back into the street. The daylight burned Nine's eyes after spending so much time in the dark, but far worse than that was the instant feeling that she was still being watched. She cast her keen pickpocket eyes around, but there was no sign of anyone or anything following her. As she turned to look down the passage between the hat shop and the sweet shop, she saw Bonehead walking past the entrance to the passage, wearing a pair of bright pink, fluffy socks. He turned his head and gave Nine a stiff wave, followed by a happy little skip, as he strode on towards a long, winding, snake-shaped building which led back from the street. A second later, Kaz scurried after him on her short legs, weaving through the other customers on the street. She was wearing an enormous pointy hat that rested on her shoulders, decorated with garnish and oversized flowers. She paused for a moment, raising the brim of her hat with one finger. She looked at 9, gave a wink, and scurried on after the skeleton as they both entered the gaping, unhinged mouth of the snake and disappeared into the building. 9 eyed it curiously. The only window seemed to be the snake's eye. 9 walked towards the building and read the bat-shaped sign on the wall. Pet shop. She stood on tiptoes and peered through the eye-shaped window pane. Inside, in between all the bustling customers, 9 caught glimpses of cages and tanks of all sizes lining the long wall. She saw strange and marvellous creatures, from miniature silver dragons to giant turquoise beetles. One small cage was covered in black cloth and had a thick padlock chain wound around it. Next to it, a glass tank housed a bright orange puff of smoke, which faded away, only to re-puff a few seconds later. A sign on the wall read, "Special offer, dragon droppings, 10% off." Who in their right mind would want dragon droppings? "No window shopping," hissed a serpentine voice from somewhere near her by. Serpentine voice. I didn't do that properly then, did I? It should be. "No window shopping," hissed the serpentine voice from somewhere nearby. 9 leapt backwards to see an eyelid, like a window shutter, flash across the window, soon replaced by the unblinking eye slit of the serpent. "Fine," said 9. "I'm not interested in pests. I have enough trouble with the ones already in my house." She glared at the eye, then made her way back to Eric. "Dish is definitely here somewhere. The shopkeepers know about her." "How find?" said Eric, scratching his head with his long fingernail. "That's the problem," said 9, looking around the hordes of wizards and witches busying along the cobbles, followed by their packed floating baskets. "I have no idea." Then a little giggle came from 9's satchel, and a tiny voice piped up. "But I have." Ooh. Chapter 6. Who can remember what is in 9's satchel? What is it going to do to help? How does it know? Join me next time for Chapter 6.